Hello, everybody. Let's talk a little bit about cities and urban land use in AP Human Geography, some of the important topics. So, looking at different urban landscapes gives us a lot of information about things like urbanization, suburbanization, effects thereof, such as water settlements. So, you can learn a lot just by looking at the urban landscape. And just knowing that this trend towards urbanization, there's also a phenomenon of counter urbanization, but we'll talk about that later. That is more in more economically developed countries. But we still have this rising of mega cities, megapolitan areas in America. So it's a worldwide phenomenon. And one of the main things that we look at is urban hierarchy. So this is basically ranking different cities with different levels, and they do this in several different ways. This graph right here, if you see the y-axis here, number of types of businesses, by the x-axis here, population, this implies that larger cities provide more services than smaller towns. And also there is an increasing number of settlements at the lower levels. There's going to be less of the larger. Looking at some of our top tier, you might see it called Alpha Plus Plus cities. The main three are London, Tokyo, and New York. And it's really interesting because even from space, you can see, or the Earth at night, you can kind of see these spots lit up like little bright points of light. Rank size rule in urban, patterns and processes basically looks at the size of different cities in a country and how they relate to each other. So rank size rule says that the nth largest city of a national system will be 1/nth the size of the largest city. So you can plug any number in here, just make sure it's the same number. So say we put a 2 in place of n. The second largest city of a national system will be, put a 2 there, half the size of the largest city. Say this is a 4. The fourth largest city of a national system will be 1/4 the size of the largest city. The eighth largest city of a national system will be 1/8 the size of the largest city. So this, not all countries follow this model at all. The US is pretty close, and it really does not work for newly urbanized countries or like less economically developed countries. Another rule that can be applied is the primate city. And this is going to be just like one huge city that's disproportionately really big compared to all the other cities. So there's not an obvious second, and the first is way bigger than the second. So a couple examples, Paris, France, almost 9 million people. And then the next largest city, only 1.2 million. Mexico City is an excellent example of a primate city model. So I'm just kind of skipping through some of these slides here. So we're going to talk about central place theory next, which has to do with a hierarchy of market services. So basically we have these nested hexagonal market areas, and we're going to have like the large, city here in the center. And then we're going to have maybe like some smaller towns and whatnot. And then we're going to have like little villages out on the edge. And it basically is just showing you what is the distribution of settlements and it depends on market areas. So this was made in the 1930s, and it had a bunch of assumptions such as a flat, featureless landscape, this idea that people will shop at the closest place possible, which was probably very true in the 1930s, but it's not now because people can order things online. So think about time, space, compression. It's not as far to order something from Paris as it was in the 1930s. Think about globalization. Those factors make this less true. So if you look at this, let's kind of look at a little, this actually on a flat plane. If you look here, even though the lines aren't drawn, we can see the pattern here. We see the huge city in the center. We see the towns. We see the villages. This is northern Germany. But if we go to, like the Front Range area of Colorado, where we have, rivers, mountains, I-70, I-25, it's going to mess up the pattern somewhat. Another big point that students sometimes struggle with in this unit is the urban models. What are they and what's the point of them? So the concentric ring model, 1920s, basically that land use follows concentric rings around the downtown. We're going to have the newest settlers in the city use older housing near the city center. And then previous groups may move outward towards higher income areas as they assimilate. So we're going to have like more of the middle class and higher class residential further out. The lower class residential is going to be further in. I like this image of it because you can see the number and the colors kind of help you see, okay, this is downtown, this kind of zone of transition here. And then we have this kind of independent worker homes. We have the kind of upper middle class residential and then the commuter zone around the edge. The sector model is going to have wedges kind of radiating out of the central business district. And we're going to have the high income areas along the fashionable boulevards, waterfronts, high ground. Industry is going to be along like river or rails. Low income housing is going to be near industry, and the middle income will be kind of in between those two areas. So again, looking at this model here, we have transportation and industry. We have our low class residential right there, lower class. We have our high class residential right here. So this is going to be some prime real estate for whatever reasons. And then we'll kind of have our middle class residential in between. So just remember the sector model is like these wedges radiating out, and it has a lot to do with socioeconomic status and really like talking about where the residential areas are for low, high, and middle class. So the multiple nuclei model is really a post-World War II model based on the early days of suburbanization, growth of suburbs. And the downtown CBD is now not the only core of business. Sorry about that typo there. So these other, if you think of nuclei as being other centers, other nuclei are going to develop. And metro areas develop suburban downtowns called edge cities. I think I have a slide that talks a little bit more about edge cities or the galactic model. Looks like it might be a little bit out of order, but hopefully I'll get to that. So you can see here we have the central business district. This can vary a lot, kind of depends where the different nuclei are, but just remember those are like centers of activity and influence. So applicability of the classic three land use models, we have ring sectors and multiple nuclei. Family status seems to be distributed concentrically. Socioeconomic status, none of those residential areas, tends to be radial, and ethnic status tends to be clustered. Those are some of the conclusions you can make. Transportation model. I'm going to talk about just some alternate models because the AP Human Geography exam, you just never know what random stuff is going to be on there. Let's look at some of these international models. So we have this like African model. We have a Latin American model and Southeast Asian city model. And Singapore is a good example of this, but basically focuses on land use, transportation, living conditions, things like that. The Islamic city model is going to apply to like cities in North Africa and the Middle East. It's always centered around, so instead of like a downtown, we have a religious point here, like a mosque. And it's going to be important for education, religion, community gathering. So it's really here. Another huge point is these market areas. And basically, it's like emphasizes communal living, privacy. Older cities were usually walled for defense and had limited access to the city. And there's going to be like also some influences of the hot climate. So these city models will try to maximize shade as well, kind of interestingly. Some sample US models. So we have that multiple nuclei. We have the edge city, the concentric zone. We have bid rent, which basically says that land near downtown is more expensive. This is kind of an interesting slide, but we're going to skip that. So a little bit more on edge cities, these suburban nodes. They're going to have high-rise offices, shopping, entertainment, hotels. It's designed for automotive travel, and they're usually located along freeways or beltways. So sometimes you'll actually hear this called the galactic city model, and just remember that it is based on edge cities. So let's jump in a little bit more to this concept of urban sprawl, which is essentially low density leapfrog developments beyond the urban edge. Sort of a lack of coordinated planning, and the consequence is car-dependent urban growth because they have to drive quite a ways from the downtown into these kind of like low density areas. Some of the contemporary urban trends, you might hear it called new urbanism, things like that. We have infill development, which can be a part of, going along with gentrification. So basically, we're going to have these buildings kind of redeveloped. The idea is to increase density back near the city core. New urbanism, think of these as being the opposite. So instead of poorly planned, like suburban sprawl, it's highly planned. Longmont is a good example of new urbanism, very planned. And this is all a part of gentrification and downtown revitalization efforts. Gentrification can cause lower income populations to be displaced as rents become too high. And this is kind of interesting, just looking at the change, looking at these colors. So red is going to be urban suburban. Low density suburban is going to be the orange. Rural is going to be the green. So just kind of look, this is 1960. I'm from Colorado, if you're noticing like a Colorado theme here. But let's just look at how this changes from 1960 to 2000. And then projection of what it could be like in 2040. Finally, just some extra vocabulary for you here. Green fields are these areas of agricultural or forest land, and it's basically undeveloped land, and it is really protected. And brownfields is going to be abandoned commercial or industrial sites due to pollution or contamination. They're really ugly. And the Gates Rubber Company is a good example. And counter-urbanization, you're going to find this as kind of a more economically developed country phenomenon where people move from the city out to the country. I think I'm a good example of that because I lived in Denver, kind of urban, a long time, and then I moved out to the countryside of North Carolina at a certain point. So that would be considered counter-urbanization.